In this episode of the IMJIN War, we're going to be looking at the diplomacy that took place between Japan and China from 1593 to 1597. The Koreans shoved completely out of the way. As we'll see, an absurd degree of misunderstanding exists on both sides. It's all going to come to a head when Ming envoys appear before Hideyoshi in Kyoto to recognize him as a vassal of China. That's all coming up. As always, before we get going, please support my channel by subscribing and hitting that like button. Like that. It's the summer of 1593, and Hideyoshi is hosting two Ming envoys at invasion headquarters at Nagoya. These two envoys are imposters, totally fake. The Japanese had asked for envoys, so Chinese General Li Rusong dressed up two of his staff officers in court robes and sent them to Japan. But Hideyoshi doesn't know this. He thinks that these two guys are the real deal. So he wines and dines them and tries to impress them. And on July 27th, 1593, he presents them with his list of demands to take to Beijing. Actually, he doesn't present these demands directly to the envoys. Hideyoshi gives them to his representative, Konishi Yukinaga, and instructs Konishi to explain them to the Chinese. Now, this right here is very important. Hideyoshi is communicating with the Chinese through Konishi, and Konishi is going to act like a two-way filter. Remember, Hideyoshi was an absolute ruler, like Hitler, and Konishi, like one of Hitler's generals, wants to keep him happy. So he's softening what the Chinese really are saying. He's painting a rosy picture for Hideyoshi that the Chinese can be persuaded to offer up big concessions. At the same time, Konishi also wants to keep the Chinese happy in order to keep negotiations alive. So that means toning down Hideyoshi's demands. Here, in part, is what Hideyoshi wanted. The Chinese emperor must give up one of his daughters in marriage to forge an alliance between the two countries. China must open up to Japanese trade. The four southern provinces of Korea, half the country, must be given to Hideyoshi. The Koreans must also send hostages to Japan, a royal prince and two high-ranking officials. What Hideyoshi is doing here is he's treating China like one of the rival daimyo he vanquished in his conquest of Japan. And the Chinese envoys, hearing even Konishi's toned-down version, they don't like it. They have never heard such presumption before. Konishi tries to calm them down by explaining that these demands aren't set in stone, that they're just a starting point for negotiations. It doesn't do much good. For the Chinese, Hideyoshi's demands are an insult. The envoys set out on the long journey back to China, accompanied by Naito Tadatoshi, one of Konishi's men. Rumors have gotten around by this time of Hideyoshi's list of demands. So when Naito arrives in Busan, he's pressed by both sides on what the final letter to the Chinese government should say. Japanese commanders are insisting that this clause or that clause should be added, while the Chinese are saying that the whole thing is just much too insulting, that the letter has to be written properly to be received. Otherwise, the Ming government will just ignore it. What Naito eventually comes up with, written in proper Chinese with the help of the Chinese envoys themselves, is a very different document from Hideyoshi's original letter. In it, Hideyoshi humbly petitions the Emperor of China to accept him as a vassal king, to allow him to bask in the civilizing warmth of the celestial throne. This forged letter, purporting to be from Hideyoshi, was received in Beijing and considered for many months. Finally, on December 17, 1594, Naito was granted an audience with the Wanli Emperor and presented with Ming China's response. Hideyoshi would be recognized as a vassal king and allowed to send tribute to China, which was a lucrative form of trade, incidentally, so this was worth something. In return, Hideyoshi would withdraw all his troops from Korea and pledge never to invade that country again. Naito prostrated himself before the emperor and accepted the terms. The Ming government then began making preparations for Hideyoshi's investiture as a vassal king. A royal edict was written. A gold seal was cast, silk robes were sewn, and a crown was crafted and packed in a box. Then an imperial mission was formed, an ambassador, vice ambassador, and entourage to convey these accoutrements to Japan and perform the official Investiture Ceremony. The Chinese mission sets out on the long journey to Japan in the spring of 1595. When they reach Seoul, they learn that Japanese troops remain encamped around Busan in southern Korea, a violation of the terms they had given Naito. It will take more than a year for this impasse to be cleared. Finally, after most of Japan's forces have been grudgingly withdrawn from Korea, the Chinese mission continues on to Japan. By this time, the Koreans have added a delegation of their own to the mission. Unwillingly, because they've been opposed to negotiations from the start. They know that the entire thing is a charade, that Hideyoshi doesn't want to be a vassal of China, that he expects a whole lot more. Konishi Yukinaga, however, has requested that there be Koreans present, and the Ming Chinese have agreed. So the Koreans have no choice but to send a delegation along. The Chinese-Korean mission arrives in Japan in July 1596. The investiture ceremony is to take place in the Hall of 1,000 Tatami Mats at Fushimi Castle, which Hideyoshi has had constructed for receiving foreign missions. Before the ceremony can take place, however, a massive earthquake hits Kyoto and badly damages the city. With the Hall of 1,000 Tatami Mats lying in ruins, a new venue has to be prepared at Osaka Castle, necessitating yet another delay. Finally, on October 22nd, 1596, the long-awaited ceremony takes place. The Koreans aren't even allowed to be present. Hideyoshi has ordered that they have to wait outside, yet another humiliation. The Chinese mission proceeds into the reception hall alone to complete the greatest farce in diplomatic history. They hold up the imperial edict before Hideyoshi, and they're disconcerted that he doesn't prostrate himself before it to show his submission. When they ask why, one of Hideyoshi's quick-thinking retainers says that he's unable to do so because he has a boil on his knee. Hideyoshi, meanwhile, is asking Konishi why the Chinese are just standing there holding up that paper. Why haven't they gotten down on their hands and knees and prostrated themselves before him? Konishi quietly explains that these are distinguished envoys from China and could not be expected to do such a thing. Hideyoshi accepts this, and so the ceremony begins. The Ming ambassador reads out the document of investiture in Chinese about how Hideyoshi's humble petition has been favorably received and how he was being granted the great honor to bow down to the emperor and serve Ming China. And Hideyoshi, he doesn't understand a word. The silk robes of a vassal king are draped over Hideyoshi's shoulders. The crown of a vassal king is placed on his head, and Hideyoshi still doesn't understand. Just imagine Konishi Yukinaga through all this. He's sitting there trying to keep his hands from shaking, praying that this whole house of cards that he's been so instrumental in building up doesn't come crashing down. And amazingly, it doesn't. Hideyoshi is still in the dark as he walks away in his new silk robes and crown. He's still wearing the robe and the crown the next day at a banquet. That's when he says, "Send me Saisho Shotai. I want him to translate the Chinese documents for me." Saisho Shotai, one of Hideyoshi's attending priests, was an expert in written Chinese. He can give the whole game away. Konishi therefore intercepts the priest and urges him to soften the language of the Ming edict so that it doesn't offend Hideyoshi. Saisho doesn't. He translates the documents just as they're written, concluding with the crystal clear order, "You, Hideyoshi, are hereby instructed to cheerfully obey our imperial commands." Finally, Hideyoshi realizes the true situation. In a towering rage, he throws his crown on the floor and tears off his silk robes, and for a moment it looks like he'll order the entire Chinese and Korean mission killed. He's urged not to do this, and eventually settles for ordering them to leave at once. As they hurry away, Konishi Yukinaga remains in grave danger. It takes several days for Hideyoshi's inner circle to talk him out of commanding Konishi to commit suicide, assuring him that Konishi had been deceived by the Chinese. After several days of crisis, with Konishi's life hanging in the balance, Hideyoshi's anger subsides, and Konishi is allowed to live. Others, however, are going to die. For Hideyoshi is about to launch his second Korean invasion. His purpose this time isn't really conquest, it's revenge. He wants to punish the Koreans for resisting him in the first place. He wants to demonstrate to the Chinese that he is at least their equal, and he wants to prove to his own people that he's still in charge, that he can't be resisted. Hideyoshi is going to save face by unleashing a torrent of blood. In Hideyoshi's first invasion, the one thing the Japanese hadn't counted on was the Korean Navy under Isun Shin. It turned out to be by far the most effective fighting force the Koreans possessed, and has remained a dangerous presence on the south coast. The Japanese therefore need to neutralize it before they begin their second invasion. They have to sink the Korean Navy once and for all. That's next.